guys are, you're both in media. You've been married for 4 years. You're both in media, but different aspects of media. Why don't you tell us a bit about how you met and maybe how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm Judith. I've been working in media for about 8 years, but my journey was not very conventional in that I actually started out in politics, law, and economics. That's what I did for my undergrad. And I chose that because I had a vague idea that I wanted to be in social justice. But then when I graduated and I found myself working in politics, I was quite frustrated with the everyday reality of that job. And to kind of channel that frustration, I wrote a screenplay and then made a really terrible film, which got me my first job working for a film agency in Berlin, and started my career in media. So for the next 5 years, I worked in various different agencies, different capacities. I did marketing, I did editorial work, I did graphic design, you name it. And I was learning a lot, but I was frustrated with the opportunities that I was given. I didn't feel like I was growing, and I didn't feel like where I was working had any vision. And so again, I decided to create my own opportunities, and I started my first business, which was a fashion business. Actually, it was a fashion label, and I brought the social justice side into it by partnering with A21. Parts of our profits went to A21. And actually, that's how we met, because he was my first employee, and then I paid for it with my life. And then I learned a lot about business. I was doing it on the side, so I had a full-time job still. So learned a lot about business, learned a lot about fashion, and actually developed this real passion for fashion. That sounds horrible, but it was more actually observing kind of as an outsider of what that industry was like and a lot of the ways that it's actually dysfunctional. But I was also seeing kind of the purpose that God maybe would have intended for it, and I became really, really passionate about that. So fast forward 2016, we moved to London, and I was given the opportunity to study at London College of Fashion. I did a master's in fashion psychology, and it was like the first master in fashion psychology in the world. It still is. And at the time, the business of fashion, which is like a media outlet for the fashion industry, wrote that fashion psychology was the future job of fashion. But then when I graduated, I realized that that wasn't the case, or at least not yet. I found that I was being invited to talk about my research, and everyone was very intrigued, but nobody actually was willing to give me a job. So again, I was like, well, I could go back to what I was doing before, or I could do something with what I have in my hand, and that's what I decided to do. So I started a fashion psychology magazine, and it's called Hajinsky, and our purpose, or our goal, is to use psychology applied in fashion and to inspire people working in fashion to put people first and change the industry, and also through the industry change culture.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. How cool. Timothy, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm Timothy. I've kind of always been interested in media, or at least the start was mostly in video games. As a kid, I loved playing them, and my dad would often scold me for that, but I think that sort of grew a real desire for understanding how these things were made and how I could make these things. And sort of growing up in my teens, I would sort of spend a lot of time on the computer, and my dad saw that, and he, as a pastor, would often ask me, hey, can you make the flyers for Sunday service, or can you like build a church website? And I would do those things, and I think that was probably the first time that I saw the work that I was doing positively impacting people around me. And I mean, I didn't get paid, so it was impacting them more than it was impacting me. But I really just grew that passion for it internally. And so thinking about university, like what do I want to do when I grow up, I decided to go to university to study a web design and technology course. And I was there for about a year before I kind of quickly realized that I wasn't really growing or learning as much as I would have liked to. At the same time of that course, I was also like freelancing and also working 1 day a week at a local like boutique agency there. So I was already doing in like the industry what I was learning to do, and I felt like, why am I even here? So I figured maybe I'll just take a year out, figure things out, maybe work for a bit and then come back. And I can still remember the conversation with my dad. I was like, hey Dad, I want to leave university. Excuse me? You want to what? You must be joking. But I wasn't joking, I was being serious, and it took a lot of time, a lot of conversations, a few tears, but he finally allowed me to take a year out, figure out what I wanted to do, and then go back later. And so that's what I did. I spent about 6 months in this boutique agency that I joined after I dropped out, and then got a job to move to Berlin, which was kind of out of the blue. So I went to Berlin to work for a small startup called Wunderlist, and I was there for about 4.5 years. And it was a really great experience. During my time there, about 2.5 years in, that company was then purchased by Microsoft, which is like unbelievable. And that was also the time my dad stopped sending me university degrees on the side as well. So he's fine, okay, I guess Microsoft is a real company, so I guess that's fine now. And I think as well, like, just thinking about that time, I mean, I was a dropout, I guess, and I didn't have the qualifications, and I just came out of, didn't have any experience, but I was given this opportunity, and I think that's just God's hand on my life. And so, moving to London, I got an opportunity to go work at Facebook for a little bit. So I was there for about 2.5 years. I've not heard from my dad since about this whole university thing, so we're all good. And actually, 4 months ago, I actually left Facebook to go back to Microsoft. The boss that I had, on my manager that I had, who hired me at the startup in Berlin, actually rehired me to work at Microsoft, and now we're working together, building out a team there, and that's just been really, really great so far. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really cool. So both of you kind of hinted that it hasn't been smooth sailing the whole time. Why don't you tell us, if you're comfortable, maybe some of the challenges that you've come up against, how it's gotten you here and how you overcame it?
Sure, yeah. I suppose there's a saying that goes something like, the biggest battles that we fight in life are between our 2 ears, and that has been my story. And in particular, the battle that I fought in this whole journey was, what does God want me to do? And trusting what I felt him calling me to do that didn't seem like it made sense from a worldly perspective. And specifically also within the church context I was in at the time. It wasn't this church, it was a different church. I guess that the church at the time had sort of this mindset that if you wanted to serve God, it was through church or in church. And so either, you had time, you made sure your job didn't take you away from serving on a Sunday or volunteering during the week, or you had a very demanding job and you made a lot of money and then your money went into the church. But because I had started a business and I had a full-time job, I had neither time nor money. And I felt like, I really questioned whether this was the right thing to do. And I was questioned by some of the people in the church for this decision, and it really, I struggled to know what the truth was, and I had to really kind of go inward and listen and trust that, and trust it even when, there wasn't success on the outside with what I was doing.
You said in the previous services that you sat in a sphere session and that impacted you. Do you want to talk about that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, Tim was already by my side, and he and I both share this passion for actually bringing the church into the world by bringing people into the world and impacting our spheres. And I remember at conference, I don't remember what year, but spheres was one of the sessions, and I just sat in there, and it was a real sense of release, because here I was, and somebody else, and another church felt and thought and proclaimed the same things that we'd been saying in private. So that was really empowering.
Yeah, cool. And what about you? What are some of the challenges that you've come up with?
Yeah, so in the space of like leaving university, and that first job that I had, that was about 6 months long. That's probably the hardest 6 months of my career, I would say. And mainly because, I was fresh out of I never worked at a company before, and about 3 months into that job, I was pulled aside by my boss, and he was like, hey, Tim, I'm sorry, we just can't keep paying you what we're paying you. The work you're doing is just not good enough. We were expecting more from you, but it's just not at the standard that we need, so we're gonna cut your pay. And that was really tough to hear, and no one wants to hear about them getting a pay cut. But I think what sort of hurt me more was when he would say, hey, your work isn't good enough. I heard that I wasn't good enough. And I quickly realized, and I think God was showing me that actually I've really tied up who I was and my identity with the work that I was doing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's important to have a strong sense of self when it comes to the work you're doing, like pouring who you are into your work. But I think there's a fine line of disconnecting your identity, like your worth, from the work. So just because this thing doesn't work out doesn't mean that I won't work out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I just want to add, like, I think that was something that God took me through, but it's really helped me now focus more on the people, not myself, but the people that I'm building for. And I think that's really helped me, and also been I guess a testimony that I can also share in my work about, hey, let's focus on others rather than ourselves. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Hey, so just really quickly, you mentioned he was by your side. How has being married helped you? I mean, you're in 2 different jobs, but how has being married helped you overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, we actually met when I started my first business. He came alongside and he made my first website because he was interested in me. I know it's, no, on.
It's true.
You were in group together though. You were in the same.
Yeah, so he had come to one group 9 months prior to that, and then anyway, we met again later, and he, you know, he said, let me help you with your business. So that's how we started meeting up and building a relationship. So there's been a real practical component up until now. I mean, he still designs my website for the magazine. He is my investor. He pays my wages. And yeah, I said earlier actually how humbling that's been to me. I know that sounds great, but for someone who like is a proclaimed feminist and wants to be independent, that's been actually really difficult to accept. But God's faithful, and I think he's really changed my heart in that regard. And not just in that regard, I think he's just been by my side in terms of some of the unhealthy views I had about myself that he identified, and he spoke God's truth over my life. And I think, you know, that is the most powerful thing about relationships. I think not just this relationship, but being in community is so important, because we can learn all these things from stage. We can even learn them in our quiet time, but unless we apply them in our relationships and we actually work it out, then yeah. And, you know, I think thinking about the industry I'm going into and the brokenness that I see there, the best thing I can do is to be whole, the most whole that I can be. So that, you know, that comes through my work, but also through the way that I treat people, the way that I love people, the way that I lead people. So.
Awesome. Last question. And you even mentioned it there, Judith, about the, you know, it's not just about that relationship, but the community. How is community in church, being a part of something bigger than yourself, how has this community impacted you in your sphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think just practically, simply just meeting people within church. I mean, I'm part of the Media Collective. Judith and I run that. Any Media Collective folks out here? Yeah, and Media Collective is just a space for people who are in the media industry to hang out and make friends and just speak to people who are like them. And I think that's what I really benefited from, just having a conversation where I can be fully myself, share the things that I want in as much detail as I want, and people are like, yeah, I get it. That's been just really great to have people really see me. And I think secondly, and maybe more importantly, we have these culture nights where people from industry who are at the top of their game just share about their journey, share about their faith, share about how they tackle challenges. And I think just watching all the people who are starting out, who come and just get really inspired, really encouraged to go out themselves and do the same thing, feel like they can actually go out in their sphere, be the best they can be, but also bring faith and bring their journey with God into that as well. It's been really great.
Great. Guys, thank you so much for sharing. Can we give a big hand for Timothy and Judith?